I know what some of you guys are going to say. I should be working on the car, not turning laps on a video game. But hear me out. I think this is going to be a worthwhile time investment. I've made a bunch of progress on the Ferrari this week. I'm going to show you guys what we've gotten done. But I'm also waiting on a bunch of parts, and I figured in that downtime, why not be as productive as possible by learning my way around Sydney Motorsport Park. So I've built a sim rig. We're going to get some stuff done on the car, and then we're going to come in here and we're going to start turning laps and see how much experience we can get before we land on Australian soil. Since we put this car together for SEMA, we haven't spent much time talking about the car's interior. It's without question one of my favorite parts because it turned out so well. Some of you may remember when we made our own carpet for this thing, hand templating out each individual piece and laying it down ourselves. We made our own center console and shift assembly, we made our own kick plates, even the door panels were taken apart, slimmed down, simplified, and put back together to mimic something more like an F40. The only thing left in this car that's originally from Ferrari is the dashboard, which is why it's going to be really, really painful today because we've got to rip it all apart. I mentioned at the end of the last episode that later this week, we're hauling the car up to Sacramento to RS Motorsport for a full roll cage build. It's a requirement by the rulebook if we want to compete in the World Time Attack Challenge. The amount of space inside of the car is extremely limited and we'll need to make use of every spare inch. And on top of that, we also need to connect the roll cage to the floor in legal spots. As a result, all of that carpet we hand-laid has to get pulled up. For those that don't remember, we made this carpet out of a roll of Perlon felt, which is what factory Porsche carpets were made of back in the day. And I chose it because of its period-correct aesthetic and because it's lightweight. And to keep that weight down, we decided to glue all of the carpet in place. In some spaces, the carpet is covering sheet metal, but in other places, it's covering Ferrari's nasty fiberglass interior paneling. It's going to create some challenges on how exactly Riley and I want to attach the cage to the floor of this car and how we can do it safely. And on top of that, everything now has a coat of glue on it, and sand is everywhere. If you don't want to be finding sand in your car for years, maybe don't sandblast parts of it. But with the interior out of the way, we can start installing some more new components. The next rule that we have to abide by is that we need a master kill switch, something to separate battery power from everything else in the car in the event of a crash. We need one inside of the car accessible to me while I'm buckled in, and then one way to activate that switch or a second switch at the base of the A-pillar on the outside of the car. I've opted for these FIA-style switches for multiple reasons. One being that it's nice to be able to remove the key and therefore immobilize the car, but more importantly, these switches have multiple prongs on the backside for both the ignition system and the alternator. Without them, it's possible to have a feedback loop where the alternator keeps the engine running despite pulling the key and killing the power to it. Inside the car, one of the switches will go underneath our key, but outside the car, where we're going to focus first, I think I've got the perfect home for this kill switch. We've got a hole in the cowl where the original windshield wipers used to sit, and given the fact that the hood is provisioned for it, I think this would be a nice, sleek place to put it as opposed to just sitting proud on top of the fender. While someone might argue that this isn't really the base of the A-pillar, the shape and body of the Ferrari means it has a very atypical shape, and I think this still fits within the spirit of the rules and should serve all its safety purposes. That, and I don't think anybody expects me to just drill a big hole through the top of my actual fender. With the switch installed, I'm really happy with the outcome. It's nice, it's low profile, the touch of red looks good, and most importantly, it's not an eyesore. Clearance to the hood itself is admittedly quite tight, but it's still usable, and I don't think there's any interference in the event of an emergency. But now we need to run power cable from the battery to the front of the car for both kill switches, and then back to the ECU to provide power. I'm feeding our power cable through the hole through which the original shift linkage passed through. It's the perfect way to get power from the outside of the body through to the inside without drilling new holes. Now, most of the interior parts that we ripped out will go back into the car, but nevertheless, I want to make sure everything underneath those panels and under the carpet is as organized as possible. Now, for the electrical nerds out there, we're going to run both of these kill switches in a series configuration, so that if either is disabled, the entire car will shut down. But with the cables run through the car, we can now crimp terminals onto the ends, which means getting out one of my favorite cheap tool purchases, a hydraulic crimper. Now, I'll admit that a hammer can do the same trick pretty effectively, but ever since buying this tool, I've been left with crimps that have yet to come off, and they look professional, so I'm quite happy with it. After the crimp, we can throw on some heat shrink, and then hook it up to the switch and call the front end done. Inside the car, I want to mock the switch up somewhere under the ignition switch, but I've got to take care to make sure that it's not going to interfere with my leg clearance once it's all said and done. I'd put it next to the can pad if I didn't think it'd be tough to reach once I'm belted in. But on the note of being belted in, I've got another set of parts from Send Cut Send, and this time it's new replacement seat mounts. The ones we made previously were adjustable and offered some forward movement, but it wasn't quite enough for me to adequately reach the pedals. So I redrew them, moving the seat forward an extra 1.5 inches, and it seems to have done the trick. We can get them powder coated later down the line, but for now I want to get them installed on the seat and get the seat back in the car to confirm everything's going to work. And fingers crossed they should, because I've retained the exact same seat angle and seat offset towards the center of the car. With the seat bolted in, then comes the process of actually getting into the car, and I'm gonna be honest, this is already incredibly difficult to do. I'm nervous about what it's gonna be like once there's a roll cage in the way. Otherwise, everything else feels pretty good, although I think I'd benefit from bringing the steering wheel even closer to my chest. Foot clearance, though, is better than ever, and I'm finally able to press the pedals without using the tips of my toes. But there is one other problem. My feet aren't on the pedals. The pedals are over here. You may have heard that these old Ferraris have a crazy offset between the pedals and the center of the steering column, and it's true. And if my legs look angled, keep in mind my left one isn't even on the brake pedal yet. That's only the clutch. Honestly, fitting me inside of this car has been one of the biggest challenges of building this thing. And I'm not even a big guy. I weigh about 170 pounds and I'm about 5 foot 10 inches tall, maybe 5'11" on a good day. I don't have much headroom in here. If I had a helmet on, I've got, maybe 1 inch tops to the roof. We've got so little clearance for the roll bar, the roll cage, all that type of stuff. My legs are pointed way off to the side in the seating position, which I want to try to rectify by maybe modifying these seat mounts or redesigning it again so that I actually sit angled inside the car. There's really not much room for me to move the pedals over because they would start encroaching on the wheel well. Just in all, there's not much space inside of this thing. It makes for a lot of challenges, but we kind of have to roll with the punches. In the last episode, I also mentioned that we have a Haltech TMS4 tire pressure monitoring system to install. This wireless system will allow us to see tire pressures and tire temperatures using these 4 individual sensors. To make it work, all we've got to do is mount it and plug it in. I'm using the module itself to make a drill template, and we're going to mount it right next to our PDM and ECU. By the next episode, we should have our backing support plate to mount on the other side of the firewall to give this some extra support. With the CAN wiring shortened up, everything is nice and tidy, and the installed system looks right at home with all of our other Haltech modules. To install the sensors themselves, it's as easy as it could possibly be. We simply remove our valve stem caps and replace them with the sensors. Haltech also offers an internal system, but because I plan on changing wheels and tires regularly, this seems like a better alternative. It would be smart for us to rebalance the wheels and tires with these installed, but I'm not too worried about it at the moment. Once I get the system paired, we'll be able to see our temps and pressures on the dashboard. With that done, we've crossed a few things off of the list, but we find ourselves in a position where we're waiting on a lot of other parts. We need the mount for our other ignition kill switch, I've got some parts and pieces for a fire system install, and I've got some modifications to make to one of our engine mounts. But while we wait for UPS and FedEx to do what they do best, or worst, let's turn our attention towards building a sim rig. Every racing simulator begins with a good frame, the so-called sim rig itself. Luckily for me, some of my track friends happen to build these sim frames at Position Advance in Irvine, California. It was a given that I'd jump at the chance to support some friends, and it helps that I happen to think they make a good product to boot. So I purchased one of their minimalist Nero competition frames and brought it back to the shop. As the heart of the simulator itself, I landed on Simagic's Alpha U, their top-of-the-line 23 Nm wheelbase that should do everything I'm going to ask of it. Is this overkill for a first sim rig? Yeah, it probably is, but you guys know me at this point, there are no half measures in the StanceWorks shop. The Position Advanced frame supports pretty much every wheelbase on the market, but I had to make some small adjustments by adding 2 holes in order to bolt the Simagic to it. With the wheelbase mounted and out of the way, we can turn our attention to the wheel and hub. I went with Simagic's GT Pro system, and to say it's incredible is an understatement. From the aluminum hardware to the carbon fiber construction to the magnetic shifters and F1 style clutches, this thing feels like a true race car grade part. I'll also be able to bolt any wheel I want to this thing, including the wheel out of the Ferrari, which I plan on doing later down the line. For pedals, I went with Heusinkveld's Sprint system, primarily because I wanted a pedal system that would offer realistic braking force, clutch actuation, and throttle feedback. Given the fact that all of this stuff is wildly adjustable, I can set it up to mimic the pedal assembly in the Ferrari down to the nth degree. Moreover, I can even offset the pedals to the right to mimic the pedal position of my own vehicle. Last but not least, I used the same seat and seat mounts as the Ferrari so that the seating position is literally the same. It should feel realistic from the feedback, the input, and the seating position. And so now we just have to find a home for this thing. And I converted a closet at the back of the shop. With a footprint of just 6 by 7 feet, there's hardly any space left in this room after setting up the triple 32-inch monitors, but honestly, it is a perfect fit. Along with the triple monitors, I also installed Heusinkveld's e-brake and Simagic's DS8X sequential shifter, which also has an H pattern within it. I also took the opportunity to hang some stuff up on the walls and really make this place my own. I've got a lot of automotive art, and these small walls only give me a place to hang maybe a quarter of it. But it's nice to have a place for all this stuff nonetheless. Given that I'm hopeful that friends will come over to the shop and use the sim rig, I'm also counting on the fact that they will enjoy what I've decided to hang up just as much as I do. But enough talking about this stuff, let's actually use this sim. Now, there's a lot to discuss when it comes to this simulator, and I do want to spend some time talking about the hardware and how I feel about it as a driver. But before we get there, I want to talk about why I've built this simulator and how I think it will help me as a driver. First and foremost, by learning my way around Sydney Motorsport Park. Without booking a plane ticket to Australia, I'd be going in blind, but now I can be prepared. My vehicle of choice for learning my way around the track is the RBMS E92 M3. It's not a Ferrari, nor is it mid-engine, but it drives incredibly well and has a lot of balance. The car is well developed enough within Assetto Corsa that I can expect it to provide worthwhile feedback as I turn laps around the park. And it didn't take long before I started to learn quite a bit. First and foremost, Sydney Motorsport Park has some challenging turns, the hardest of which I found to be the transition between turn 16 and turn 17. I went off here again, and again as I tried to push to go faster and faster. Most importantly, I learned that if you load the car incorrectly, it can send you careening towards a wall, as can the transition into turn 5. And I think we can all agree I don't want that to happen in the Ferrari in real life. Now, some of you might be wondering, how realistic is this really, and does it actually translate to the real thing? And the answer is, well, it's reliable. It's not perfect, but this is going to keep me from going in without any understanding of what the dynamics of Sydney Motorsport Park are like in actuality. I won't be quick when I arrive in Australia, but I will be prepared, and that's what counts. Now, for the curious, after about an hour of turning laps in the E92, and in my first ever session on Assetto Corsa, I managed to get my time down to a 1:41.245. Now, to be clear, there is a ton of time left in this car, and I'm still pretty slow, but if you want to drive along with me at home, that's where I'm at, and I'll keep you updated. Now let's talk about the hardware. I've only got a couple of sessions in on Assetto Corsa at this point, but I've been driving on iRacing for the last 3 weeks, and I'm about to acquire my B-Class license. So I've got at least a bit of time under my belt, and I'm happy to say I am blown away by this system. The feedback, the force, and the detail within the Simagic wheelbase absolutely mimics driving a real car. Within minutes, your brain begins to forget that it's looking at graphics and perceives it as the real thing. Now, although this E92 is not a sequential in real life, I've got the shifter set up as one so I can start building muscle memory for when I'm driving the Ferrari. The Husingfeld pedals are absolutely incredible. The braking force required to actually bring the car to a stop feels like the real thing. And to be clear, I do know what the real thing feels like. Some of you guys have asked in previous episode comments if I have any real-world driving experience, and the answer is yes. I've got quite a bit of seat time in a number of BMW race cars. I'm not going to say that I'm fast, but I'm certainly not slow, and I am confident and comfortable behind the wheel of a car around a track. All of that, of course, is to say this simulator really does feel like the real thing, minus a few critical points. The way you communicate with a car in a simulator is the same, but the way it communicates back is not. First and foremost, the simulator is visual, and it amplifies what you see with force feedback through the wheel and the pedals. Unlike a real car, you can't feel what the car is doing underneath you with your gut. Without a bit of caution, this could create bad habits as a sim racing driver once you turn to the track, but if you're cognizant of it, it can tell you how to use your eyes better than ever before. With any luck, I'll be able to turn something like 10 laps a night from now until September, and when paired with the track time I plan on getting in the Ferrari here in Southern California, I think I'm going to be well prepped for Sydney. But I know what you're thinking. If we've got a simulator and Assetto Corsa, how do we get the Ferrari into the simulator so that I can drive it too? Or better yet, so that you can drive it? Well, the good news is that my buddy Mike Gwynn has been hard at work developing a model of the Ferrari that we can import into Assetto Corsa so that we can all enjoy it. It'll take some development time to make sure that it drives like the real thing, but ultimately I'm hopeful that we can pull it off. Now, with all of that said, I've been having an absolute blast with this simulator, and as much as it's a tool, it's also been really enjoyable to use. And if you want to join in on the fun, or if you want to race me, you should come over to the StanceWorks Discord and join us. There's a link in the description, or you can head to discord.gg/StanceWorks and join in on the fun, whether it's conversation, racing, or literally anything else. As for what comes next on the Ferrari, as said, I'm in the middle of prepping to head to Sacramento, which happens tomorrow. I've got the windshield removed for the cage install, but the bad news is it cracked as it came out, which is going to make this a huge challenge to find a new one. I'm also partway through a fire system installation, which we're going to touch upon in the next episode once I have the car back to the shop. So if you haven't yet, you should subscribe so you don't miss the next episode, and I'll see you next week.